¿Qué pedo, puro pinche fam? Um, Welcome back to Puro Pinche Gol. Today we're actually doing a breakdown, a reaction video of Mexico's win 1-0 over Turkey. A match that was played once again on a college stadium because, as you know, Club World Cup and the Gold Cup are happening at the same time here in the United States. I think it was a morale boosting performance by Mexico ahead of the Gold Cup on this second match in preparation for that tournament. So let's get into it. All right, quick overview as I mentioned. As I said, México ganó 1-0 contra Turquía. Un gol, buen gol, de Orbelín Pineda in the dying seconds of the first half. Kind of a smooth play. We'll break it down a little bit further in a minute. An assist from Julián Quiñones, who I think deserves to be called the MVP of the match. He looked quite threatening. Kind of a difficult start for him, um, because I think he kind of struggled to find the I guess to settle into the role that El Vasco Aguirre wanted him to have. And once he did, he helped Mexico uh, and the forwards, Ángel Sepúlveda, Chino Huerta, sorry, not Chino Huerta, Alexis Vega, to look more dangerous than what they did against Switzerland. So, yep, um, it was a friendly match. I think it was a good challenge for Mexico. If we look at the formation, let's start with that. Let's look at the formation. Mexico started with a 4-4-2. I think we all expected Vasco Aguirre to be a little more conservative this time around. He made some trial and errors against Switzerland, making a couple of like experiments here and there with players that had never played together, right? That back line of five, while at times have proven to be effective for Javier Aguirre. I think the swath of changes that he did against Switzerland proved to be a mistake. This time around, he played it safe with Malagon at the helm of the goal for Mexico. In the back line, you have Jorge Sanchez, Cesar Montes again as the center back, Israel Reyes as the second center back, and Jesus Gallardo coming back as the starting fullback on the left for Mexico. In the midfield, I'm excited to say, guys, that Marcel Ruiz finally had his chance to start with Mexico alongside Edson Alvarez, Orbelín Pineda, and Alexis El Nalgon Vega. So strong midfield, if you ask me. And then forwards, this time around, we saw Julián Quiñones and El Chavo Ángel Sepúlveda from Cruz Azul as the starting forwards. I think it made sense that El Vasco Aguirre made some of these changes. This is pretty much a rotation to make sure that the previous starting 11 roster or squad get some rest before the first match of Gold Cup. But I think also with the emphasis of structuring the midfield, finding a balance with, because as we saw against Switzerland, it was very, uneven at times. As I said, with Switzerland, it was very fluid from a, 5-2-3, and then at times you could see that the width of Mexico was pretty much towards one side and not having full coverage as El Vasco likes to have. And then also they were lacking pressing on the transitions, both from the offensive to the defense or defensive to offensive, depending where when they lost the ball or they were trying to instill some damage when counterattacking. So I think it made sense that Vasco Aguirre went with, the old and trusty, la vieja confiable, a la cómoda, un 4-4-2, que la verdad hizo ver mejor a México, sin duda alguna. Ahora, let's take a look at some of the stats, and maybe this will give you a better idea of what I said with the tactical emphasis that El Vasco Aguirre tried to employ this time around, and also going back to his roots, going back to the things that make him feel comfortable, lo que le hace sentir en casa, al buen Asco Aguirre. Possession for Mexico, 42%, 58% for Turkey. Needless to say, numbers pretty much say it plain and simple. Turkey controlled the ball throughout the entire 90 minutes. But here is the kicker. Mexico was very compact. It was a very compact team. You could see that every single line behaved as El Vasco Aguirre wanted. They were super tightly knit to be this, wall both for defending and counterattacking. It was a very block centric approach by El Vasco Aguirre, which again, as I said, these are the things that El Vasco Aguirre is known for. He's known for that kind of tactics, for that kind of approach on the matches. So I think this time around he says, "Screw it! I don't want to get I don't want to get a lot of goals against. No quiero que me goleen otra vez. Así que voy a no parqueó el camión porque no lo hizo, no lo parqueó, pero definitivamente se enfocó en defender primero y atacar cuando pudiera. Shots on target, Mexico 3, Turkey 1. Even though Turkey had like I think 17 shots, only one of them actually went or I guess actually one was on target, actually went to the goal, which forced goalkeeper Malagon to have an interesting save. Um, but it just goes to show that Turkey is still struggling to have a final third polish. I think this is something. Listen, I'm not an expert of Turkey football, but I did some research, and it seems to be a recurrent issue with Turkey having or missing that final third polish, which I hope they'll get it. Vincenzo Montella is doing a great job. I think Turkey is a very, very competitive team, and I'm glad to see Mexico facing against rivals of this caliber. And then finally, corners. Mexico had none. I think it's very, this is an interesting stat for me. And also, again, I think it's a good example to show how Mexico was first focused on defending and then counterattacking. And it also goes to show that when Mexico was able to do that, an offensive transition, they were finishing the plays. Unfortunately for them, none of them finished on a corner kick, but at least there were very few instances where Turkey grabbed Mexico um, distracted or wrongly positioned on the pitch, right? And so even though Turkey had 10 corner kicks in favor, um, again, it just goes to show that they are not necessarily polished on the last few touches, on the last thing that is important to score a goal. Let's do a quick breakdown of the first half. Uh, Listen, again, as I said, even though Turkey was pretty much the el dueño del partido completamente. Los primeros 45 minutos estuvieron entretenidos, un partido peleado. I think this is the level that Mexico should be facing almost every single time they can. Um, and the biggest highlight from here is, of course, Orbelín Pineda's goal, which I think we all feel relieved that he's back on the score sheet. Because I think even though El Vasco Aguirre has had a back-to-back good performances, let's say good performances. I don't want to be overly positive or overly enthusiastic, but let's call it by what it is. Vasco Aguirre has had some decent performances recently, not only in Nations League but before Nations League as well. And before Vasco Aguirre joined, y'all remember Orbelín Pineda missed a penalty in Copa America, and I think since then he had lost confidence when playing for Mexico. So it's nice to see that he's getting back into the scoring sheet, making himself present on the final score with a very well manufactured goal, if you ask me. Cannot remember who was the pre-assister because I know that Julián Quiñones assisted Orbelín Pineda on the goal, but it was less convoluted of a goal compared to the first one against Switzerland, where the rebound found Santi Jimenez. That's pure luck. In this case, it was a well-built counterattack play where Julián Quiñones tries to commit to make a shot. He understands he's not going to make it, but Orbelín Pineda, smart enough, commits to the play. He's able to win the ball, quick touch, and then shoot with the left foot. Lucky for him, the keeper had poor visibility and the ball ended up going back to the net. So that's lucky for him and then good for Mexico as well. And I think it's going to help him get confidence back. On the second half, Mexico and El Vasco Aguirre made some adjustments. I think this was a very hombre por hombre kind of subs. If I mean, again, no big experiments here from El Vasco. Si te fijas quiénes entraron y quiénes salieron, entró, déjame te digo correctamente que no la quiero cajetear. Entró Santi Jiménez, Raúl Jiménez to sub Julián Quiñones and Ángel Sepúlveda. We had Luis Chavez coming in for Marcel Ruiz. We had César Huerta coming in for Enalgón Alexis Vega. El Piojo Alvarado for Orbelín Pineda, and Eric Lira ahead of Edson Alvarez. So again, it was a very conservative approach by El Vasco, prioritizing keeping the structure that they've had throughout the entire match, and then also making sure that he's putting piernas frescas en los lugares más necesarios. Si te das cuenta, los cambios fueron claves en el sentido en el que refrescó las zonas que él entendió necesitaban jugadores que tuvieran ya descanso, que pudieran terminar los últimos 30 minutos del partido y que causaran un poco más de peligro cuando tuvieran la oportunidad de esos rompimientos de contragolpe. I don't know if you noticed, but there were a couple of plays between el Chino Huerta, el Piojo Alvarado, Jesus Gallardo, where they were doing a lot of link-up plays, building from the back, having crosses, um, Jesus Gallardo having really good vision to come from behind El Chino Huerta and be a relief. So Chino Huerta can find a space, pass the ball, and Jesus Gallardo can either cross or find El Chino Huerta again on a quick pared and a quick wall play. So yeah, I like that. I really enjoy seeing those counter attack transitions and drives from Mexico. It was nice to see that El Vasco Aguirre once again. I'm gonna say this yet again. I'm not a fan of El Vasco Aguirre. I criticize him plenty of times, but I gotta give him credit where it's due. He has shown to be fluid when needed. Against Switzerland, he went from a 5-2-3 to a 4-2-4 to a 4-4-2 when needed. This time around, if you pay attention, it was similar transitions. Sometimes he had a 4-2-4 depending on the counter attack approach. Sometimes he had a 5-2-3 depending if it was defending. So I gotta give him that. I gotta give him that credit, right? Um, Although a lot of people say that that's pretty much Rafa Marquez, not El Vasco Aguirre, and I believe him, but El Vasco Aguirre is the face of this team, so I'm gonna give him that credit. And man, I mean, final thoughts here. My last remarks here is that it's nice to see that Mexico, at least for this match, was able to regain some defensive stability, nullifying Turkey's pressure, looking very strong on cutting those ties and not falling prey of Turkey's intense uh, style of play, and then also limiting Turkey on quality chances. Right, if you pay attention, Turkey, even though again they had way more shots than Mexico, more corners, none of them, very few of them, should I say, were extremely dangerous or key or follow up plays, whatever you want to call it. Mexico had a good defensive display. I think this helps Mexico to continue with a good momentum boost, even though they lost against Switzerland on a rough match. I think this win against Turkey put things into perspective, get the balance back onto the enthusiastic, positive side of the house. I am not a overly enthusiastic, positive fan, but I do have to say that this definitely puts the balance on the other side, where we can feel more confident going into the Gold Cup. Some I want to mention a few players here. I think Julián Quiñones should start for Mexico. It's going to be difficult for El Vasco Aguirre to leave him out, so he needs to find a way to make sure that Julián Quiñones plays. Again, nice to see Orbelín Pineda getting more confidence. I, for once, think that it's nice to see Luis Chavez back getting some minutes. He hasn't been playing a lot in Russia due to injury, so it's nice to see him back on the pitch. And then also Marcel Ruiz, I think, is a very good complement for Edson Alvarez. Edson Alvarez is a destroyer. Marcel Ruiz can be the other uh, worker bee that Mexico needs on the offensive side, right? Because Edson Alvarez is not great at attacking. And then what's next for Mexico? All right, Mexico starts Gold Cup. Mexico starts the Gold Cup against the Dominican Republic this Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. Is June 14th. Correct me if I'm wrong on the comments. But that's the first match that Mexico will face. I think that's the Gold Cup opener in general. So yeah, I hope to see Mexico retain this defensive structure and then find a way to sharpen the attack with either Julián Quiñones, El Chavo Sepúlveda, or Los Jimenezes at front. But this is it, guys. This is our breakdown of Mexico's last match, win over Turkey. These are reactions. Let me know in the comments below, who do you think is the MVP of this match? Do you think Marcel Ruiz should start ahead of Luis Chavez, Eric Lira, and company? Do you think he is the best complement for El Machín Alvarez? What are your thoughts on having Jesus Gallardo back as a fullback for Mexico? And then also, you know, what are your expectations for Mexico? Do you think Mexico will finally get a doblete this year, winning Nations League and the Gold Cup? So yeah, let me know in the comments below. Please don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on the notifications. You can also follow us on Instagram, TikTok. There we post memes, latest news, and shorts. All 4 episodes. I'll catch you during the week. I'll see you in the next one. Stay tuned because we will do a preview of Mexico's Gold Cup. And last but not least, I am sorry for all my buddies who really like the USMNT because these last 2 matches were tough to watch. I don't think it's Pochettino's fault. I think there are a lot of players who need to look themselves in the mirror and commit to be there for the USMNT at all times. Alrighty, deuces.